Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're very excited to be having this conversation as you're thinking about applying to architecture school and to GSAPP. In particular, I am Amal Andraus. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and I have here a fantastic group with me today. Andres Haki, who is an outstanding practitioner and thinker, and since last summer is a new professor of professional practice here at the school, also leading the MSAAD program, and you'll hear more from him on this occasion. I also have invited a number of our students, great students who there's nothing better than hearing from students themselves what it's like to be here at the school. So Jude Hassan Irshed El Shdaifat is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Is that? I have to put my glasses. That's why, and I'm not used to this anymore. Who's a dual degree MArch, second year, but also MS Red, the Master in Real Estate Development. Danielle Bernard, who's an MArch third year, also a dual with the MS Red program. We have Cecilia Gonzalez Rubio, who is going through the MSAAD program, and Kevin Sani, also MSAAD. All of them have very different backgrounds. All of them made certain decisions while they were here at the school in terms of how to weave things together. And so, I'll be eager for you all to hear about those as well. So many of you, most of you, a lot of you have sent a series of questions about the school, and we've kind of folded them and nested them in a way that we can address most of them kind of comprehensively. And of course, any questions that remain, especially concerning kind of more detailed processes, etc., Danielle Smaller, the Dean of Admissions, and Stefan Budiger along will be happy to answer you. So what makes GSAPP unique? Why would you come here? How are we different? This is a question, obviously, that we get asked, and I think there are a few things. Obviously, I know you're applying to incredible schools, and so what makes us different? First of all, academic excellence. I think we have an absolutely outstanding faculty that is both engaged in practice, but also engaged in discourse, thinking critically about the future of architecture, the future of the field, and redesigning that. And that our faculty's kind of own research and modes of practice really kind of informs the curriculum that is a very live curriculum that is always questioning, what is it we should be teaching today, not so much teaching what architecture is, but what it could be. And so there's a lot of this kind of opening up that happens, and a sense of exploration, and a sense of, I like to say, openness, intellectual generosity, and you are equal students, and we are discovering together what are the possibilities. I think that is an approach and an attitude that infiltrates the school and the faculty and also the student body. And I think that I like to we are in New York, and that is not just a location, that's a spirit. It's an idea of density, of diversity, of the encounter of difference, and how those encounters create a sense of richness. And I like to also say that we are a kind of urban condenser of ideas, right? It starts with ideas. Ideas is what gets exchanged, and it gets manifest through architecture, and questioning what form that takes is part of what you would be doing here and the process. And that's why there is tremendous energy and excitement, I think, at the school around certain ideas, the question of environment, and how do we address, what we call the scales of environment, from the scale of a brick to the scale of a building to the scale of a territory. Today, architects need to make all those connections. The question of global engagement. The school is in a global city. It's in New York, and it has a network of collaborators, alumni, etc., that reshapes how we teach. We're always thinking relationally about what we teach and how we teach. And the question of visualization, there's a very long legacy. I'm sure you've heard the school, started the paperless studio and were incredibly strong in the terms of digital representation. But that gets overlaid. It's not just about drawing. It's how we represent the problem to find new ways to intervene. How we visualize the context within which we exist, how we visualize architecture is already a design project, and we're working very at the cutting edge of digital technologies and questions of visualization. And I really think that it is a question of how we practice, what we practice, and how we reshape the question of practice. And so I like to think about graduating architects that are skilled in this notion of scales of engagement, deciding how they're going to put their skills together, how they're going to assemble all the parts to become architects for the future at a time when the built environment and architecture is really at the core of so many questions. So this is where I turn to all of you and to ask, do you feel like in your trajectory here, what I'm saying is something that you've experienced firsthand in terms of your studio, your seminars, or who would like to say something? And our students are not shy.
Definitely not. It's funny, I just walked out of my final review with Dina Mollendaus. And a lot of the things that she just mentioned actually came up in the review in terms of understanding the potentials of kind of our experience here at the school and taking it outside into a more global context. Our studio travel to Tunisia, for example, and we were discussing kind of like a huge range of questions, not only about representation, but about the future of architecture, materials, just a huge range, and I'm very happy that I'm here at the school it's my next to last final review, and it's really exciting. I feel like the school has really kind of given me a lot of opportunities to think in many different ways and apply all these contexts that the school has to offer.
No, definitely. I mean, I think that this school has made me reconsider what architecture is. I've been addressing different skills, different disciplines within the practice of architecture, and I feel like I've just felt more in love with it than before.
Well, I guess for me as well, I think what's more striking for me is just it presents the question of like, to whom does the architecture serve for? And I think that itself sort of like expand my notion of like representation in terms of like how we represent the project for this type of like not only like different types of like kinds of users, but also like in terms of priorities as well, like how should you answer all these questions and then sort of like represent it in sort of like a very convincing way as well that is readable for everybody. And yeah, definitely in terms of just trying to, at least for my studio, we had Tatiana von Prusen for Art House Studio, where the questions of how do we sort of like reread the idea of the gentrification, where we try to go beyond the stigma of it as being bad. So it's definitely has been like an eye-opening for me as well. Yeah.
Jude, do you want to add something?
I think for me, I definitely agree with everything that's been said already. And from this semester, the experience that I had, I was in Hilary Sample's studio for housing, which is a core class that everyone has to do. And our trip was, we traveled to Mexico City. And I think that was very interesting because Mexico, in comparison to New York, is very different. Not just the environment, the culture, it's very different, but it's very interesting to go to somewhere very different and try to get as much from that city and think about it and how it can be kind of placed in somewhere like New York, and how can we change it and manipulate it and transform it in a way that it works with the conditions of the urban fabric of New York and the social, economic, implications that we have here. And I think even though the entire studio did housing, each professor took a different take on it. And Hillary, for example, looked at maintenance. And it's something that, we see and we interact with every day, but we tend to forget about it. And it actually informs a lot in architecture. And the more conscious we are about it, the more deliberate our decisions are when we take design decisions. And that's something that I personally, I was aware of, but never really, thought, how can that really influence my design approach and my design decisions? And I think specific niches like that is something that I've seen at GSAPP and my experience here, and I think it's something very unique and something that I think GSAPP does very well.
So just in a few answers, Tunis, housing, traveling to Mexico City, that's already in second year. I think we're the only school that, supports travel, but it's not about traveling. We're not doing it in an exotic way. It's really about thinking relationally about places, putting New York in relation to other places, and finding so many different ways to re-enter architecture in a fresh way. Design opportunities. Is it maintenance? Is it other questions that you can bring to the question of architecture? And while there are so many different ways that our faculty approaches those questions, the conversations are very rich. And I think this is something that, for example, Andres has really fostered in the AAD program in terms of creating a new platform for conversation where students come back after a number of years, often of either a number of years of professional practice, or come from different places and they want to recenter their kind of engagement with architecture. Andres, do you want to, and if you've seen the work that comes out, of course the MMark is incredibly strong, but AAD has been unbelievable in the last year. So Andres, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah. I've been seeing these days the work that people like Cecilia and Kevin have been doing, and I think it defines very well what the AAD is doing. So it's bringing basically people from around the world, talented people that already have with knowledge and with certain things that they care about. And the way we work in the AAD is basically believing that architecture counts, that it's crucial in the way the world is evolving, and basically to think what's that from the perspective of architecture we can do to address crucial issues that are being disputed right now. And that means gentrification, and that means waste, and that means many of the things that we're discussing, like maintenance. But basically it's a question about the environmental dimension of architecture. And that's a very rich topic, because it's a topic that has to do with how do we relate to nature, what is the future that we want for our environmental engagement, but also it has to do with how do we turn technology accountable, or what is the way we deal with gender issues, and what is the way that we can also think of the geopolitical tensions we live by or we experience now, and what is the way architecture can intervene them and introduce other possibilities, alternatives. So we really believe that architecture counts, and that what is happening here, not because we know already and we train people to do that, but because there's an ecosystem here in which people that already have a knowledge and that have already their concerns come here and find an amazing place where basically they're connected to many, many people and to many, many forms of knowledge that make them grow and being able to develop a position that is much stronger and better informed. And that has to do with New York.
And that has to do with New York.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think coming back to New York, we're a cultural hub. We're an institution that is contributing to the life of the city. Our events, our exhibition, we're a platform for ideas. The amount of people that come through New York and come through the school, and the exchange of ideas and that diversity of encounters is really what creates a sense of hub here. And this is where you meet your future partner, professional or other. This is where you meet your future employer. You know, it's an unbelievable network of people who come together in this kind of very sort of compressed moment, let's say, of intersection. And the curriculum and both AAD and the MARC program really start in New York, right? If I take the MARC, you know, it's like Broadway, and you know, kind of reimagining that street. And then housing, we start to compare Mexico City versus, you know, Harlem or the Bronx, and then we kind of expand to environmental question, and we go beyond the New York centric, and you know, what is happening on the edges, and the relationship between the urban and the rural that is experienced here, and then finally, kind of we continue to explore. But even though these networks are incredibly local, they're immediately global as well. So you're getting this intense overlay. And while this happens at the level of ideas, it also happens at a very pragmatic level. Engineers are, you know, roving constantly in the studios. We have the best professional architects and experts that we can invite, you know, to reviews, etc. So the conversation is immediately connected between an academic sense of the campus, right, Columbia, and then, you know, the city beyond. And these intersections make those kind of encounters, you know, so strong. And you know, things like office tours, or things like working with great institutions and collaborating with the Museum of Modern Art, or with the Storefront for Art and Architecture, or collaborating with the Architecture League, or the Center for Architecture. You know, being part of that network of institutions is something that is, you know, renders us not just an isolated, you know, moment where we're speaking about architecture, but really in the sense of engaging the real world. We're completely embedded within that. And that transpires through studio, through reviews, through seminars that are really connected to the city, but also through our making studio, which is the new makerspace, which we have doubled in size and now contains all kinds of machines that I will let the students, you know, speak to. But more importantly, for me, what's been exciting about the Making Studio, and that's why we don't just call it a fabrication lab or makerspace, that it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking about materials and materiality as a new mode of entry into architecture. And the Making Studio as a form of pedagogy, that's where the students are incredibly involved, has already collaborated with institutions such as the Queens Museum, or we had our students make models for the Chicago Architecture Biennale, or so that's, you know, and we are networked with all other fabrication shops and maker spaces and incubators around the city. So that sense of overlaying all these networks, I think, is what the school can have as a result of existing here and participating in the ecology that is New York. Does anybody want to share your experience of?
So I think the makerspace is it's a wonderful space. I think Josh Jordan, Professor Josh Jordan, he is extremely friendly with us in terms of we come in, we have crazy ideas, and he helps us.
They have crazy ideas.
We have crazy ideas, and he helps us like fine-tune them to a point where you can produce a very beautiful model, and everything we need is there. And if something's not possible, you know, there's a way to work around it, and it's all about the process for this particular moment in our like final reviews and stuff like that. Like everybody's freaking out, like let's make a model, but then you go in and it's figured out, and there's plenty of space to do it. And it works out. It worked out today for me.
You did a beautiful project.
No, when it comes to the makerspace, I think it's incredible. I partially work there too. It's amazing how you get an idea and you go to makerspace, and doesn't matter how hard it is to condense it into a physical thing, you've always find either the resources and the people and the help to make it happen. So that's amazing. The makerspace is definitely a really enjoyable place.
Yeah, and as I think also the idea of like the makerspace, you can definitely see other people's like models as well. I think that's just like how they laid out the makerspace definitely can inspire us to like make other forms of how you approach a model or something. And I think yeah, it's a very good way to like literally explore whatever materials that you want to bring, and then definitely push the project even further in terms of materiality.
I think for me personally, I'm very afraid of the fabrication lab, and it's it's like all these machines, I've never used them, I don't know what to do, but just like you said, you kind of go and kind of ask, and everyone is there to help you, really, whether it's your professors, it's the people that work at the Fab Lab or the makerspace, your colleagues, and it's like, yeah, our studios are kind of small, but honestly, if you had this much space or this much space, it's all gonna get filled with rubbish anyways by the end of the semester. So I think if personally, talking my personal experience and my opinion, I think it's something that's very nice and very, it kind of builds a community, because just like Dina Mal was saying earlier, the school is very diverse. Our student body is very diverse, and so are our professors. And you really, not only do the students come from different places around the world, they also come from different experiences and backgrounds, whether it was they were previously in art history, or they were working at a museum, or they were working in, I don't know, medicine. You get, honestly, a very diverse group of students, and that's part one of being in a space that, you know, you can interact with them, you learn from the students themselves, and then that kind of environment allows you to kind of pop your head and be like, hi, how do you do this? I saw you did this thing, can you help me? And everyone is just willing to help and there for you. And whether it's their diverse background, their experiences, what they know, it just adds to the richness. And having spaces like studio, and then taking those ideas and going to the makerspace and implementing them there and seeing what's done there, it forces you out of studio and forces you to mingle with other people that you wouldn't normally mingle with if it was in your own studio. You would, when you're in the makerspace, you see what the AADs are working on, what the third years are working on. Everyone has different models, and you ask, and you're like, oh, do you like your professor? What did you learn? So it also creates communication between the different years and different students, which I think is very important, because I think diversity, whether it's cultural, educational, experience, I think it all relates back to architecture, and architecture is it's honestly influenced by so many different things. So having that is, I think, one of the most things that I really appreciate about GSAPP. So, yeah.
You're hearing it from her and from them, and I'm so excited that you know, this is the experience, and because it is a community. It is a community that you know, where the sense of openness and generosity and exchange and collaboration. I mean, I remember when the good old days when I was teaching. When I started teaching, you know, students never wanted to collaborate. They really wanted. And now they, you know, they love to collaborate. And the collaboration extends to how we've kind of renovated and expanded the studio spaces, where it's very much about, it's almost like an urban setting. You have like the shared tables for models for, you know, sitting and having a review. And then you have the individual desk. And it's not about the little cubicle. It's really about this shared experience, and ideas circulate across studio. They circulate through the making studio. They circulate between students and faculty, and this is kind of ongoing sort of conversation. And you know, there were a number of questions in terms of like students who don't have a background in architecture, and you know, we encourage everyone to apply. We're really looking at, you know, what makes you special. How can you bring what you learn, what you're passionate about to architecture, and how can architecture reinforce what you're passionate about? That feedback loop, it doesn't matter. I promise you, at the end,
I'm actually a non-background,
right.
So
yeah.
If I may
Yeah,
interrupt,
please,
I apologize. So I studied linguistics and natural sciences before coming to GSAPP. And that experience was kind of cultivated through traveling in East Africa, working as a dental assistant, and then realizing that it's more about this conversation about the lack of architecture schools there, and kind of understanding what that meant. And I was like, okay, like architecture school, like let's do this. Applied, and it was an incredible experience, and it obviously still is, to, you know, the person next to me studied architecture, the other person on the other side didn't study architecture, and we were all asking extremely different questions, and that's how the studio culture, like, you know, comes about. And then in the third year, when we're paired with AAD, we are asking questions again, because now it's more, whether it's more diverse culturally, or the advanced studios are engaging in different questions. It's just this, you know, studio becomes this nexus, and then with the extension of the makerspace, they become this, it's a nexus of kind of exchange of ideas and questions about architecture. And again, no background, I think it might even be, you know, a strong point, at least it was for me, I think, just truly just asking different questions. And
I think it's a kind of spirit of immersion, right? Where within the first, you know, after the first semester, you can't tell who has a background, who doesn't have a background, and those who have a background have kind of shifted how they understand architecture, and those who don't have brought again their interest to bear upon architecture, and you know that sense of kind of freshness. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I always talk. You know, everybody's like, so anything is possible. Yes, but we have very strong core curriculum. So there was a question about electives, and you know, there are many electives, and you get a lot of freedom. But you start with a very strong foundation, whether it's AAD. In the summer is sort of the core of the program, or the AMARC. The first 3 semesters are incredibly structured, and then there's a kind of incredible freedom and openness that occurs with the advanced studios. I mean, in the last year, for both AAD and AMARC, you have up to 18 studios to choose from. And so while we don't have like a thesis, everybody's experience is a kind of thesis where students are asked to articulate a position as they almost, you know, curate. Once the foundations are laid, they're curating their own trajectory and assembling the parts of the school in different ways. And by the end, when you present your portfolio for awards, it's a form of thesis. And the character and the identity of these portfolios in terms of in architectural exploration are incredibly unique.
Well, I guess I want to add about the thesis. So I think, it's incredible that the event studios, being that we have to think about all kinds of like issues within the studio itself, it's already like a mini thesis. And I think what's strong here in the program is that you can actually tailor your studio options as well, so that for a particular interest, if you have like already have a strong interest of what you want to do in the program, and then the option of the studio being like, we have like 18 option studio, which is very like, I think beneficial for us students, where we can pick and choose and then actually shape the trajectory of our interests, which I think is very, very nice. Yeah, I think that's what I think.
Yeah, I think this is what Kevin is saying is super important. Like, we really welcome complexity. We really welcome people coming here and telling us what they care about and what is important for them in the world now to be addressed through architecture. But once this has happened, also we're ready to put together the right people to complicate the discussion, to make it really be grounded on a knowledge that we've been accumulating. And there's many people here that have been working on the topics that you're interested on and that really can give a depth to it. And that depth is, of course, theory, but also an ecosystem of practices, design practices that already address that issue and that you can learn from and you can expand from. But also, for instance, instrumental things, how to represent realities that are very difficult to represent, how to represent a reality that is operating simultaneously at different scales, or something that has to do with medicine, but then has a huge contribution to the built environment. So one of the things that for us is also very important is that we're welcoming all these huge amount of topics that are shaping contemporary existence now. But once they get here, we make sure that we can do with them something very serious, and that you guys find the opportunity to grow on that and to have very deep understanding of what's happening and what's the role of architecture there.
And I think that feedback loop, or thinking about practice and design as a form of research practice, obviously all of our faculty is engaged with the question of research at different scales or in different forms. And you know, I think TA-ships, teaching assistantship, is very particular to the school. You know, after your first semester, you know, those who do really well or that develop a kind of strong relationship with a topic, or, you know, often become TAs, etc. And or research assistants in the various centers, and so there's a lot of opportunities to also intersect, you know, outside of studio, or it is again this notion of learning as a form of teaching, and teaching as a form of learning, and we really believe that having students engaged at that level is also crucial. I know some of you are, you know, kind of contributing you know, in this way as well. And it's, you know, with the AAD program, it's a 3-semester program, but often the best students, I'm like, what are you doing here? You know, in the summer, they're like, well, I'm TAing for so-and-so. And there is this spirit of continuity that that we can see in our students kind of staying afterwards and continuing to come to our events after they found a position somewhere in New York, or when we're traveling and having events globally, we kind of connect with them as well. And that ties to you know, the notion of serving our students to find employment. And, you know, as I said, this is a very strong network already in the city, but we have an incredible network globally as well. And I have to say, over the last few years, we've ramped up our kind of career services, and we have ongoing portfolio reviews. We have a fantastic alumni mentorship program where our alumni are tied to students to kind of give them mentorship. As I mentioned, there are, you know, office tours. I know in my office we've ended up interviewing people who came through, you know, during the office tour. So again, being here in New York, kind of, and accelerating the notion of offering career advice, etc. In architecture, outside architecture, you know, has become very important here at the school. You're not thinking about that yet, is it?
I mean, I think that GSAPP has been amazing, and it's also super intense in the way that you have your hands filled with so many things to do. And the career services is there always helping you out to try to find out how you're gonna be engaging with the city and with work afterwards you finish your studio work and whatever. There are a lot of events happening on. There's a portfolio review, which is super helpful because while you're studying, you get to get comments up on your portfolio, so whenever you apply, you're gonna have like a better chance of getting a job. And so career services has been super helpful. Yeah.
And that's maybe something, in my opinion, that it's really different from here than from other places, because the number of possibilities of practices that Columbia and GSAPP connecting people to the city of New York and the networks that grow from New York is a huge difference. Because of course in New York you can find some of the most important practices in the world, but you have so many laboratories and so many centers where architecture is being explored as new innovative practices. And I think that makes this place very particular. The possibilities of expanding a career afterwards are huge, but also very diverse and in a way very innovative. And that's something that is growing from the school. Mm-hmm.
And in the sense of, like, you know, both always being inside and outside, as you will note, we have 2 dual degree students here. And in the last few years, dual degrees have been increasing at the school, so much so that, you know, now we're really engaging that possibility, and they are, you know, it's a kind of fantastic way to combine the different parts of the school. And I wanted to, we're working on this, but I mean, this year we have a tremendous number of them, and I'm looking at Danielle for numbers. Huh? 47 dual degrees. So in the spirit of assembling your own education and never wanting to leave the school, that's what they, but do you want to speak a little bit about, and you can decide to become a dual degree student after you've come in, and whether it's between with CCCP or the real estate program or planning, and there's also dual degrees between planning and other, other programs and departments at the university. We have now increasing joint studios between architecture planning, architecture preservation, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I'm dual degree with real estate development, and I actually came into GSAPP just wanting to do architecture, but I just love it here so much. I'm like, let me just add another degree. No, but I honestly, the reason why I decided I was going into my second semester, my first year, I was thinking more about the discussions we're having in our studio and just things that I was more curious about. That were being discussed, but I personally wanted to know more in depth. And I was like, okay, how can I do this? What can I do? So I started talking to dual degree students, and specifically from the planning and the real estate development program, and just learning more about what they do. And I felt that doing a dual degree with real estate would give me the knowledge that I want to know, that I would like to gain, and that would help me with architecture, not because I want to switch into development or investment banking, no way, but just because I really wanted to know how does that part work, because in reality, development does put limitations on how you design architecture and the materials you use and the extent in which you build things. And, you know, it's like now we're in grad school, and it's like, yeah, we can do whatever we want, you know, you can do anything, and any idea is going to be appreciated and thought about very seriously. But then also, once we leave GSAPP, it's like, how are we going to take these ideas and these very, not extreme, but more uncommon in the everyday world, and put them into architecture and actually have them inform architecture. So I felt that by doing a real estate degree, I can understand that world, understand the limitations, and when designing, have that in mind.
Exactly, yeah.
So, move on. But yeah.
I think for me, it was a very similar experience. I mean, I understood it as something that was going to teach me a different skill set in a way. But I really wanted to tie it back to architecture, because obviously it goes hand in hand. And I think that at GSAPP, the real estate development program, as opposed to other schools, is in GSAPP, obviously. In other schools, it's in other departments, is what I'm trying to say. So by that, like the notion of the school, of the development program being in the same place where architecture is being taught, I think we're starting to remove those boundaries of like this real estate heavy kind of vibe that is ever present, it feels like sometimes. And this dual degrees are really challenging these notions of what these boundaries are. And when we, there is 20 suits and like people are formally dressed, maybe like the first week of class for the real estate program, and I walk in, probably late, with like paint on my overalls, and, and it's really important for architects, I think, to be in this position where you start questioning these boundaries, because we want to explore and we want to push architecture in a new direction. And I think that we're asking so many questions, and I think that, you know, encompassing this real estate part of it has really motivated me to think outside the box. And there's many other programs as well, like planning is doing incredible things, and that's asking more questions and in terms of scale. And
I wish I can do all the dual degrees, just all of them. My parents would be like, please, no, stop.
Enough. Do you want to say a few last words about your experience, or what you're hoping for? Or
I'm coming here with already have a master's degree, and I openly applied to GSAPP when I applied for my post-professional degree, and I think it's been an incredible place. I used to have already a studio where we did a thesis, and knowing we're coming here, I can actually experiment it, and then further on my interest here on the advanced studios, and actually keep thinking of like having that, again, like that mini thesis I want to reiterate in every advanced studio. Really, really sort of like help me, just like ground on like my ideas, and just, be in the school where, again, all the critics like coming from, it's not just like all the studios critics like coming in, not just coming from like only an architecture perspectives or background. So it really opens up in terms of like comments, how you push forward in terms of ideas, projects that you would normally don't see. And I think here GSAPP really allows me to like really pursue that. So I think it's very nice, yeah.
I would have to say that the thing that I really appreciate the most about GSAPP, yes, we're in New York, but I think that what GSAPP does really, really, really well is condensing people from all around the world. Yeah. I've been learning so much from the different backgrounds of other people who have been either studying architecture before, have been practicing architecture before, or not, like Daniel. So it's amazing that you get like, I've learned so much from GSAPP, and the syllabus are all amazing, but I think I've also learned about the community of GSAPP so much, and I think that's what I take the most out of.
Great. Andres, few last words?
Well, I would say that we have a policy of open doors, which is something that comes from like all the details of basically like you don't find the offices closed, but also that you can really come to the studios and you can talk to, I often go to studios and I talk to you guys and you tell me what you're doing. And that's something that keeps forever. So that's if someone wants to kind of send us comments, to ask more questions, there will always be opportunities to really approach us. And that's something that will happen now, will happen while you're here, will happen in the future, and not only with us, like with this kind of very large community around the world.
So on this note, again, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we weren't able to answer all of your questions. Any further questions, anything regarding financial aid, we do give financial aid. We give it to international students, etc. Housing, how to apply, please apply. And put your passion forward. We're looking for people who have passion, who have the desire to bring architecture to the world and bring the world to architecture, and believe that architecture can be an agent of change, and take pleasure in knowing that this is a lifelong process of learning, of producing new knowledge, of finding new ways to engage. So thank you all. Thank you.